Hello again, I'm Anna, and I want to talk about the Wonka movie. Now, I'd first like to apologize in advance to the Chalamet family. What is that? Ooh, okay. So, anyway, I'd like to apologize to the Chalamet family for what I'm about to say, because every time I look at Timothy Chalamet's face, I think of that rat dude from Flushed Away, the main rat, that guy. They could be twins. Now, I'm someone who will watch bad movies on purpose. Sometimes I will seek them out because I have nothing better to do, or I simply want to get my mind off of something serious, so I will turn to the worst looking movie I could find. And with Wonka, I went to see it in theaters with my brother because he really wanted to see Wonka. The first Wonka movie, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the original, I did not see until I started making this video. I watched the Johnny Depp version, and it's so funny because I'm pretty sure it came out when I was like a lot younger, but I went to see it with my family, and my both of my parents remember feeling nauseous after that movie. And it's so funny. I can't tell you if like I remember feeling nauseous specifically. I remember not necessarily loving it, feeling like it was really creepy. But when I went back to see the original after watching Wonka in theaters, I was laughing. It was a funny movie. I think a lot of the jokes were really well done. I was kind of surprised by it. And they kind of, if anything, toned it down, let's say, because it was still creepy and there were a lot of things that happened during the chocolate tour that felt uncomfortable and everybody was screaming, right? So clearly there's still things that are supposed to creep you out. But when it came to Wonka, this is the backstory of Willy Wonka, which we don't really get in the original film. We do get some in the Johnny Depp film. And in that one, the backstory was that Wonka's dad was a dentist, and because he was a dentist, he didn't want his son eating chocolate or candy, so he wasn't allowed to. And that's where Willy Wonka decided to make his own candy, I guess, become obsessed with candy and chocolates, something like that. I'm not gonna call myself an expert. Does Willy Wonka have a backstory in the book? I don't think so. So that's the only backstory that I know of. Now, Wonka. They rewrote his backstory, different from the Johnny Depp movie, but I think just original entirely because they wanted to focus on a much younger Willy Wonka. Like, who was he when he was a man without a factory, right? A man without Oompa Loompas. So, in this movie, we see him get off of a ship and go to somewhere called the Gourmet Gallery, where there's a bunch of chocolatiers, including the competitor from the original movies, Slugworth. And Slugworth has a couple other guys. They call them the Chocolate Cartel. So these are the dudes that would be the competition for Willy Wonka's chocolate. Something super weird about Willy Wonka is the way that they treat chocolate in the movie, in all the movies, because they treat it like a currency, right? Which historically, yeah, it's pretty accurate, right? Like cocoa. The industry, the trade is gigantic worldwide and has a lot to do with slave trading as well. So when there were moments in the movie where people were obsessing over chocolate, I had to just keep reminding myself that it's a kid's movie and they're not necessarily trying to draw references to things in life. I don't know, at some points the chocolate seemed like drugs or something because they were like, look at the negative side effects of this cop eating way too much and accepting chocolate as payment from these Slugworth people. It kind of seemed like it's like, are you trying to say something about chocolate? Or about greed? Or about money? Or about corruption? Police corruption? They talked about police corruption in Wonka. Wonka said a cab? For example, when the police were being bought off with chocolate by the Slugworths and the Chocolate Cartel, where I started to think, does the chocolate represent something else, right? Is this something in society, right? If it's being used as currency, maybe we can draw upon some similarities to other things. Yes, I am worse than your high school English teacher, but they were making so many references, veiled references to chocolate being addictive and all-consuming, right? And changing parts of your life. I can't believe I forgot to mention, but the police actually attempt to drown Willy Wonka at one point to threaten him out of making chocolate. Listen, I like chocolate too, like in small amounts. I told my brother after this that watching this movie did not make me want to eat chocolate. I think a lot of people have seen the Introduction in the Square by Willy Wonka, where he's like screaming, he's like, my name is Willy Wonka! Oh, and it was a little hard to watch, a little hard to listen to. But the wild thing is, he has this big box of chocolate making. It's his own mini factory, and it's got a bunch of ingredients inside magically. The ingredients are stuff like sunshine and happiness and dreams. He has these 4 giant cocoa beans that he stole from Oompa Loompas in order to make his chocolate. I don't actually know the process of making chocolate, right? But I think, the ingredients at the very least are questionable to me. The very first chocolate that he makes and gives out is a chocolate that makes you fly. Fly? Not really. A chocolate that gets you high. You start levitating, kind of like the fizzy lifting bubbles. So, chocolate that gets you high is rather interesting. I thought that maybe there was something there, but they like pick up these things and they drop them. It doesn't really matter that it sounds like something else or that it could be referencing something else. I just don't think they thought that deep about it when they were writing this. A big plot point in this movie begins when Willy Wonka first arrives to some sort of hotel, lodging, maybe like a rundown motel setting, and he's given something to sign, a contract for staying the night, which made me realize that after that, Wonka decides to scam children with the same kind of horrible contract, so interesting. And even though a young girl there tells him to read the fine print, it looks like he scans the page and he's like, oh yeah, it looks good, and signs it. Later we find out he can't read. Or like it said he grew up traveling, and then all of a sudden he's at the gourmet gallery. This man never had money. We keep things really vague about his past. But to me it was very strange that he couldn't read, because when they tell us about his life on the boat, he was living with his mom. His love of chocolate came from his mom. That's his backstory this time. His mom makes a little pot of chocolate and then gives him a chocolate bar, and he's like, it was the best chocolate I've ever tasted. In this time, in the flashbacks they show us, this boy has to be 10 years old. That is past the time when kids read. And you are telling me that his mother never taught him how to read in that time. The movie even shows us his mom writing him a note and leaving it inside of a chocolate bar. And now we have to believe that she wrote that knowing he couldn't read because she never taught him how to read? But I remember that when he's giving Noodle a chocolate, Noodle is one of these characters, he's giving this young girl a chocolate, but he's asking her first, like, what ingredients she wants, right? He wants to make her something special. And he says something like, I'll just throw in some dreams. Like, I don't know. Something like that. Obviously something that's not tangible. And he gives her this little chocolate, which is like a cloud with a lightning bolt. Super adorable, and it tastes great. And I think it, like, gives her an idea for something. But there's an undercurrent throughout this movie of scamming, because the Slugworth people are definitely trying to pull one over on Wonka and on everybody else, because they at one point even put an ingredient in his chocolates that make everybody like grow a bunch of hair and change colors. So you could say that they're scamming, and they're also buying off cops with their chocolate. Meanwhile, when Willy Wonka says stuff like, this chocolate will make you happier, like taller, smarter, will make you a better lover. There's this dude that decides to go and marry his fiancée after having one of his chocolates because he had a crisis of confidence before. Because this man proposes to this woman, and she's like, do I know that you're the one though? Like, are you gonna sweep me off my feet? And man, instead of this dude being like, yeah, what the hell? He's like, no, I guess not. And he leaves. And then, like, Wonka is a waiter at his table, and he's just like, hey, loser, take this. Which, again, it seems very strange, right? Like, Willy Wonka to me throughout this movie seems like a snake oil salesman, but because they didn't go in that direction, he happens to be like a snake oil salesman that's actually giving you something miraculous. Or, and maybe this is closer to it, it's like the sugar pill thing where you got the placebo, but he never tells people it's a placebo. He's like very much telling people, this will do this, you know? Something about chocolate that I liked in this movie was that you could tell that the chocolates they made for the movie were made out of chocolate. Maybe that sounds dumb, but to me, I knew that they weren't props necessarily, or props that weren't edible, because you can make those same designs using a lot of the chocolate design techniques. I don't know if you guys have seen, I think his name's Amaury Gauchon. And there's another chocolatier that's super famous who on Instagram have put out like a bunch of these videos where they're decorating chocolates and they're doing all these colorful designs. They're making really fun shapes, textures. They're putting like jellies and stuff inside. I mean, that stuff looks tasty. I've never had a chocolate that fancy or anything, but when I saw them on screen, I knew exactly what they were. And it made me happy to think that there were some chocolatiers on set, right? People having fun with that. That seemed cool. So I mentioned that Willy Wonka had to steal cocoa beans from Oompa Loompas in order to make his chocolates. Well, an Oompa Loompa follows him and is obviously pissed off. He's been sent to get all the chocolate back, either in chocolates form or in the cocoa bean. And Willy Wonka's like, oh no, he doesn't really seem to care that he stole, like, the only cocoa beans left on this island of Oompa Loompas or whatever. He just wants to get this guy off his back. But let's talk about the Oompa Loompa for a second, because while you might have already surmised that these small people with orange skin and green hair that look strange but only ever work for Wonka doing his bidding seem similar to something, it's because they are. Roald Dahl literally wrote Oompa Loompas as African pygmy slaves. The pygmy people are an ethnic group, and usually in reference to African pygmy people. These are also little people. And it is after knowing that and seeing these Oompa Loompas... Oh my god. I almost wonder, like, if they had done more to change what Oompa Loompas are, if it would have been better. But they're still essentially chocolate slaves, which existed in history, in world history. Sorry, I should have said present tense, because it still exists today. And all they did was make these dudes orange with green hair, and they thought that'll be enough. Nobody's ever gonna know. Why? Roald Dahl is super old, and he has a lot of old racist and anti-Semitic ideas in his books. So, really, when these things get translated to movies or newer books, that stuff gets taken out bit by bit. I don't think casting Hugh Grant made anything better racism-wise, and in my opinion, I think taking out the Oompa Loompas entirely might have been a better choice, but when I looked into people wanting to remove Oompa Loompas and depiction of Oompa Loompas from the Wonka film, I also came across the community of actors with dwarfism talking about how when the roles available to their community are so few and far between, taking that away is only detrimental. I think it's better that that stuff gets taken out, but also the knowledge that it was there in the first place still needs to exist. Writing new stories is not a bad thing. I think one of the reasons that we're even getting like a third Wonka movie in theaters is because people are constantly trying to make money off of things that have already made money before. So, and not really anybody's fault in association with this movie, this cast and crew, this Wonka movie. It's not really their fault. But it must be so exhausting to work on the same properties, like, every 3 years? Come on, man. But, I mean, there were some times in this film where, you know, looking at Timothée Chalamet, he was doing the thing, he was enunciating, he was acting, right? He was putting his whole thing into it, but there was nothing behind his eyes, just vacant. Couldn't blame him. I know that a lot of musical movies now are being marketed as not musicals just to get more butts in seats. Yeah. Wonka was one of those movies, and while I couldn't remember any of the songs off the top of my head besides the one where they're talking about having a sweet tooth, the "Do you have a sweet tooth? I do," that one, yeah. And I just Googled more songs just to see, maybe, like, if I remembered more, maybe I liked some more of the songs than I remember liking. And I just listened to You've Never Had Chocolate Like This. It's actually not a bad... It's... For the movie, it fits in really well. I think that a lot of the songs in the movie were well thought out. And the reason why I'm saying this, it sounds super complimentary, is because when I saw the Mean Girls musical, oh my god, so many of the lyrics, I was like, why? That doesn't make any sense. Or they just rhymed by using the same word twice. Ooh, okay. So I feel like the Wonka songs were more creative. And, like, that was Timothée Chalamet singing. They probably, not Photoshop, they probably auto-tuned him, but it didn't sound bad, and it didn't sound weird. And it matched with the song. And there were a bunch of times when I was watching the movie that it reminded me of scenes from Mary Poppins. And, like, Timothée Chalamet and Noodle, Willy Wonka and Noodle, when they had, like, a bunch of time together chilling. I thought that was pretty fun. I remember being a kid and watching stuff, like, with big dance scenes and musical numbers, and I was very entertained, right? So again, this is like a kid's movie, and I think a kid would really enjoy it. I also loved the character of Noodle because she is very funny, she's smart. It was a little sad at the beginning. She's an orphan who is in debt to these people who are scamming people who need lodging. But, spoiler alert, Noodle in the end does find her mom. And it is so cute, it is so sweet. And Timothée Chalamet is in his feelings about his own mom because his mom's dead, but like his mom was the closest parent he ever had. But it was sweet. Now, Keegan-Michael Key's character is, I think, the chief of police, and he is given chocolate bribes from the chocolate cartel. But the more chocolate he's given, the more he eats, and this movie uses a fat suit to depict a fat actor. And that it's pretty old to do. It's pretty lame. I know that many Hollywood productions still use fat suits, but there's backlash for a reason, right? It seems always for a cheap joke, always in favor of hiring actors, and it just seems like unnecessary at this point in time. But sure, they were trying to say, like, he got fat after eating all that chocolate. Maybe that's a consequence of eating too much chocolate. Is that all the movie's trying to say, though? I mean, I guess so. I don't know. Somebody's gonna have to come to me with some kind of, like, literary analysis of Willy Wonka, maybe the movies and the book, because is there something more there, or am I just, like, am I crazy? Ooh, but beyond creating corrupt police characters that are in cahoots with business owners that are very wealthy, they also connect the church to this corruption ring because it is under the big church in town where all of the businesses, like the Slugworth, the chocolate cartel's chocolate is stored underneath this church in a big secret vault. And I think it's guarded by, like, chocolate monks. So it's pretty funny because I think that kind of stuff is very in line with the humor of the original movie. They were, in the original movie, I remember a joke about the last box of Wonka chocolates that may have the golden ticket being sold, and the man they sold it to is kidnapped. And then his wife is asked, like, hey, we have the people on the phone, they're finally asking for a ransom. And she's like, what do they want? And he's like, the last box of Wonka chocolates. And she's like, how much time do I have to think about it? And it's actually much funnier than anything in the Johnny Depp remake, right? But again, that kind of joke was more in line with this new Wonka movie, with what they were saying. There were more obvious things in this movie. I feel like, is this a super mean word to use? I feel like sometimes the jokes were ham-fisted. They push them a little harder than they need to, let's say. I would recommend, if you were to watch this movie at all, to watch it at home, where you can skip through things and pause and go to the bathroom or stop watching entirely. But it's not terrible, right? It's definitely not as bad as some other movies. And again, I'm a bad movie watcher. I'm very biased. Not with a love of bad movies, but with this tolerance of bad in movies, you know? When I got out of the movie theaters originally, I looked at my brother and I was like, why did you make me watch that? I did not enjoy it. When I think back on the movie, I think I remember it more fondly than when I was sitting there. But I also, with ADHD, it's very hard for me to sit in a movie theater and not at some point get bored and get restless and, like, want to be on my phone or something. But I don't want to do that, so then I just sit there and I get resentful of sitting there quietly. So, probably not the movie's fault, but the only other thing would be that I saw this man selling everything in his store. It looks like trees and clouds and plants and everything's edible, right? Meanwhile, he has these clouds of cotton candy that he takes from and he sells to people, and then he steps on, like he gets on top of with his feet, and then he still eats it. Maybe that's too picky, but come on, man. Ew. Thank you for listening to that. this rather unhinged rant. I mean, very light, right? Very light commentary for what is a very light movie anyway. Thankfully, that's what I needed. Have a great rest of your week.